I'm here tonight to introduce some very special people, some very special friends of mine. You know who they are, I know who they are, so let's go fucking crazy!
They came with one intention, to bring straightforward, no-nonsense rock music to the masses. With grit and determination, they rose from a small rock scene in Australia to become one of the most successful acts in the world. Their 1980 record, Back in Black, is the second best-selling album of all time, and to date, they have sold more than 200 million albums worldwide. With nearly 40 years in the music business, they are arguably the greatest rock and roll band the world has ever seen. They are the one and only AC/DC.
Had great catchy songs, but they appeared to be living the rock and roll dream, and I guess were, and probably still are.
To be around them was to be around a bunch of guys who were keeping alive the ethic of working class, loud, cacophonous rock and roll and everything to do with it.
We do what we do best, which is, rock and roll.
It worked. It clearly worked so well, so quickly. It only took them just over 6 years to become one of the very biggest heavy rock bands that there ever was. You'd be lucky if a band had managed to release 2 albums in 6 years these days.
They had a simplicity about them that told its own story. We're not talking about music, we're not talking about rock and roll, we're not talking about groove, we're talking about a spirit.
They nailed it. They nailed it very, very early, and they keep doing it. They're really straight down the line, easygoing blokes. That's what I really like about them. They haven't really changed at all.
I guess we just keep true to our roots, I suppose, and we don't try to change. And as we strike a chord, what do you reckon?
Belting out rock and roll, that's all we do.
They have inspired and influenced so many people in so many different ways, but ultimately everyone still looks up to them because they are AC/DC.
With the release of the Iron Man 2 soundtrack in 2010, rock giants AC/DC achieved their 3rd #1 album in the UK and their 8th top 10 in the US. A compilation of hits dating back to 1975, it has so far sold almost 2 million copies worldwide. Following on from 2008's record-breaking Black Ice album and the band's subsequent 2-year tour to support it, after nearly 40 years in the music industry, AC/DC are clearly stronger than ever.
The interesting thing about the Iron Man 2 soundtrack album is it's the first really proper AC/DC compilation, because they always refused to do them in the past. There was one put together in the late 70s that was scrapped before it even came out. So DC used the whole idea of being approached to do something with the Iron Man 2 movie to do a compilation album. Of course, there's nothing new on the record, it just represents them across the ages and the eras. But the fact that they could do that and sell so many copies, I think it really proves AC/DC now are bigger than they've ever been.
Since Black Ice came out, you couldn't turn a corner without being confronted by AC/DC in some way. And the success of Iron Man was simply the getting across of their musical message to a new audience. But perhaps if this had been 10 years ago, that audience might have viewed AC/DC as a bunch of old farts. The younger audience are a lot more savvy these days. And also, I think the fact that AC/DC do carry some kind of cultish clout, they are viewed very much as legends. And although the years preceding Black Ice perhaps weren't their most fruitful, the fact that they perhaps out of the public eye for sort of large periods of time helped sort of fuel that sort of cult fire that sort of exploded underneath them and then just went absolutely stratospheric.
Now, in their late 50s and early 60s, the band members show no sign of losing their passion and energy for heavy rock and roll. Singer Brian Johnson, guitarists Malcolm and Angus Young, bassist Cliff Williams and drummer Phil Rudd continue to play to packed arenas much as they did when AC/DC first rose to superstardom in the late 1970s. And although their antics off stage have calmed over the years, on stage they're still one of the world's most energetic live acts.
Angus and Brian normally have done the interviews that I've done with them, and there are these couple little blokes sitting on a couch backstage, Brian with his little thing on, Angus sipping on a cup of tea. Meantime, you've got, busloads of people in black T-shirts sculling Jack Daniels outside and going along for the night of their lives, and these two unassuming blokes who are about to cause mayhem and merry hell in front of 20,000 people are cool as cucumbers backstage. It's quite a dichotomy, and it's fascinating.
AC/DC are without question one of the greatest live bands of all time, and remain so. Every time you see them, you just wonder at how much energy Angus has, because he is perpetual motion. And the fact that he keeps going night after night, almost without stopping, is remarkable, to say the least. It's a force of nature.
It's not the money thing that kept you going. It's enjoying what you do. Yeah, that's what keeps you going. Yeah, I'm just one of those people who can, put on the guitar, put on the school suit, and once I got the school suit on, I'm ready to go. I wind up the back, and off I go.
Among the music world's most iconic figures, AC/DC's guitar god in a school uniform, Angus Young, is one of only two band members to have remained in the group since its inception in Australia in the early 70s. The other is his older brother Malcolm, and together they have steered AC/DC through 5 decades of hard rocking.
Never, ever, ever underestimate the importance of the Young family in the AC/DC story. It's their vision, it's their drive, it's their support. They're a big Scottish family. They all went to Australia. They're a clan. They stick together and they fight for their own. And that attitude has prevailed from day one in AC/DC. It's a family affair.
Malcolm and Angus Young have always been the fulcrum of AC/DC. Malcolm was pretty much the founder, and Angus became the image and the talismanic figure within DC, and has been for so many years. And it's become more and more their band, I think, as time's gone on. They're the songwriters, they're the people who decide when the others are called in to record, etc. And they're very controlling. Very much it's their focus and their vision. And without that, you wouldn't have DC as we know them today, have known it for so many decades. However, they're very secretive. They don't like doing interviews. They don't like being public figures, and never have done. And I think that combination of being able to do the music in their own way, of knowing better than anybody else what is AC/DC, but also keeping themselves apart from the public, has made DC who they are and what they are today.
And while they've been written off many times as irrelevant and as relics of rock's distant past, the Young brothers have consistently remained focused, ensuring that their current work maintains the standards set by the albums that launched them into the big time back in the 70s.
If you compare the Rolling Stones and AC/DC, the last time the Rolling Stones made a good album is so long ago, to be fair. However, every album has one or two songs that people pick up on, and then the band are quite happy to throw anything in just to fill up the gaps. Malcolm and Angus have a different approach. They're so cut off in a way from that sort of mentality and feel of anything will do for AC/DC. They're proud of the heritage and the history of AC/DC and what it stands for. And the last two albums, Stiff Upper Lip and Black Ice, in the 21st century, have been a return to form, especially Black Ice.
As long as there's good music still coming through, that's what keeps the band.
We still feel we got, good rock and roll tunes in us. So that's what keeps you going, the challenge, of trying to come up with something a bit different, but still AC/DC.
However firmly established the band are now, their rise to the top was far from simple. The story of the Young Brothers and AC/DC began back in 1963, when their family emigrated to Sydney, Australia from their native Scotland. A working-class family with little money, they passed through immigrant hostels with their 8 children all sharing a passion for music.
They were a working-class Glasgow family, and a bunch of brothers and one sister, the eldest sister Margaret, and she used to in fact buy records, sort of 45s of, Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and Bo Diddley and Jerry Lee Lewis, and she planted the seed.
It was Angus and Malcolm's older brother George, however, who would be their key inspiration. Within a year of the family's move to Australia, he had formed a band, the Easy Beats, and by 1966 they were achieving worldwide success.
The Easy Beats were a mid-60s Aussie beat combo. You could almost say they had a lot of connections with the Beatles. Huge hit internationally with Friday on My Mind, written by Harry Vander and George Young. And they're the important two, because those two went on to become crucial in the development of AC/DC. George Young, A, because he was Angus and Malcolm's older brother, and therefore already popular within music, and his relationship with Harry Vander has been compared to Lennon and McCartney. In a funny way, went beyond that, because whereas Lennon and McCartney very much wrote for the Beatles and a couple of other things, Vander and Young found their celebrity and their niche producing other bands and writing for other bands. George Young, to some extent, along with Harry Vander, took DC under his wing in the early days, certainly in terms of production, and in probably the way they compose and arrange songs. So you can never underestimate the value of having that within the family.
And it was through George that Malcolm and Angus had their first taste of fame.
Something that happened at the height of Easy Fever, when the Easy Beats were the biggest group in the country. A fan magazine, or just the entertainment magazine, foolishly printed the address of the Young family house in Burwood. About 200 kamikaze girls from a local high school descended upon the Young family dwelling, and about 20 of them got inside, and this was the barbarians storming the gates. I mean, they trashed the house. They mauled everything they could find, including little brother Angus. Because remember, I think when they came out here, Malcolm was 8 and Angus was 5 or 6, so they were still young. And I would imagine having 20 screaming schoolgirls manhandling you at that impressionable age may well have had something to do with deciding this could be fun.
With George as both an inspiration and a guiding hand, when Malcolm and Angus left school, each pursued a life in music. And in 1973, after failing to succeed separately in various bands, the two brothers joined forces and created AC/DC. With the other band members drawn from the very best Sydney had to offer, in the December they made the first of many appearances on the local pub and club scene, a notoriously tough live circuit.
It's a chicken and egg thing as to how it developed in the Australian pubs. Did the audiences shape the bands, or did the bands sort of, inform the audiences? Well, it was a bit of both, but if you couldn't rock, you were dead.
Australian music was forged in the pubs and clubs of this country. That's where the bands learnt their chops, paid their dues, honed their skills. AC/DC came out of that great heritage, and, they earned their stripes in front of the punters of Australia.
When we were playing live, it was always if the audience, if they liked what we did, they clapped, and if they hated it, they booed, We never worried so much about, Jesus. In fact, I don't think we ever really sort of worried. I mean, for us, it wasn't even the case of, even when we started, of money or anything. It was just a great excuse not to work, I think, I
was running a club in Melbourne called the Hard Rock Cafe, actually. It was, nice original idea of mine. And they came and played for me, and then took off interstate, and I didn't hear from them for a while, and all of a sudden I got a call from Malcolm to say we're stranded in Perth, I think it was, or Adelaide or Perth. Would it be possible to lend them some money? Which I did, and they came over and they played my club. Myself and another guy called Bill Joseph, we put together a management deal which involved giving them a bus, a road crew, we gave them a house to live in, and we paid them a wage, I think it was $60 a week each.
A key element of the band's impact was Angus. Obsessed with the guitar from an early age, originally both he and his brother had shared lead duties in AC/DC. But as the band developed, Malcolm took a back seat, allowing Angus, still only a teenager, the space to shine.
When I was younger, I used to have when I was about 9 years old, I had a Gibson book and I had gone through it, and I used to always keep thinking if when I got older which guitar I was going to get, and I would keep looking through, but I always used to sit and look and sort of worship the FG. So as soon as I had some money, I thought, well, this is the guitar for me.
Those times that Angus spent in the bedroom in Burwood, curled up on his bed in the corner, turned him into an incredibly proficient blues guitarist. He doesn't tend to get that much recognition. You think of him as a good rock guitarist. He's a great blues guitarist, and he has an extraordinary flair, an extraordinary facility with what he does on his Gibson, and I think a lot of young players have listened real carefully to those records with headphones on and trying to work out what he was doing.
Angus also became the most visually arresting member of AC/DC. In an attempt to distinguish the band from their competitors on the live circuit, he tried on a number of outrageous stage costumes before his sister Margaret suggested that he go on stage in his old school uniform.
You know, in the beginning it was his gimmick, I suppose. It was something there to keep the visual. And it was my sister. She came up with the idea, and she thought it was a good thing, because when I used to come home from school, I would be running my room and I'd be practicing on my guitar, and she always thought it looked very cute. And I think even, it's now people recognise you as that guy in the school suit,
The most intriguing thing about the AC/DC school uniform thing was Angus is completely associated with it these days, and you can never imagine Angus going on stage without wearing his school uniform. But the funny thing is, it was almost desperation that drove him towards wearing it, because he tried so many different ideas and costumes. Zorro, Superman, gorilla outfit, for instance. Nothing worked somehow. And then he went actually on stage one night wearing his schoolboy uniform because he didn't have time to change, and that did work. It gave AC/DC an identifiable image at a time when image was so important in rock, because we are talking about the early 70s, when you had the Sweet, you had Slade, you had David Bowie, you had Mud, all of whom had their own identifiable image that came out of glam. The fact that Angus had his identifiable image and that wasn't glam gave them a hook to sell to the world.
While Angus was attracting the most attention on stage, both as a spectacle and a guitarist, Malcolm remained less visible but equally essential. Not only was he the band leader, providing the group with focus and direction, he also began to develop a unique musical bond with his younger brother.
What can you say? They're a telepathic musical team. This combination, Malcolm's a rhythm player and Angus is a lead. It's all perfectly sort of aligned. Just because you can have that chemistry and that balance, and they're both doing totally complementary and interlocking things, which is interlocked by something even beyond musical kind of empathy. They're interlocked by blood.
I think the initial thing was Angus, just seeing this kid in a school uniform, suddenly I'd never seen anything like that before. It was amazing. This little kid, I thought when I first spotted him on stage, he was actually only about 14, 15 or something, and he was playing this incredible guitar. And his brother, Malcolm, once you get through the visual, the show business side of Angus, and you start to listen to what Malcolm's doing, you realise the talent is just enormous. This was really their shot at making it in life, and outwardly and to everyone else, they were party guys, but at the end of the day, they were pretty together.
By September 1974, the band had been through several lineup changes, and it soon became apparent that their lead singer, Dave Evans, wasn't the right man to front AC/DC. As luck would have it, an experienced vocalist from Perth was also looking for a band, Bon Scott. Another immigrant from Scotland who had found success in the late 60s with the pop band The Valentines and later the country rock group Fraternity, Bon was older than the various members of AC/DC, and he wasn't an obvious choice to become their lead singer.
Bon came from a bubblegum group background, and then from there he went into a progressive rock group called Fraternity. When I heard that they wanted to put Bon in the group, I didn't quite get it at first. You know, it was just due to my preconception of him. Certainly once he joined the group, he just embraced the whole rock and roll thing, and, you know, with Angus and Malcolm, and just turned into, you know, this madman.
Bon was in the Valentines dressed in you know, pink and purple cashmere, and then he was in, you know, Fraternity where he was in brown rice and sandals and playing a flute, and then he ends up in AC/DC where he's in jeans, sort of, you know, playing, you know, hard rock and roll. He was a soldier of fortune. He was a journeyman. He was a guy who liked to perform. He had a great wit and charm about him, an enormous energy to him, a cheekiness, a cockiness. He was a knockabout Aussie lad.
Despite some reservations, Bon joined AC/DC and immediately added to their sound and their appeal.
Bon Scott was an absolutely vital recruitment. He made the band. He was so much the focus of the band. He was so much the vision and inspiration of the band that in his brief time in DC, and it wasn't very long, if we put it in the context of their entire career, he became massively important. What Bon gave them is that presentation of rock and roll. He was rock and roll. The way he acted, the way he led his life, the way he behaved on stage and off it. He was rock and roll to the core in the best possible sense of the term.
With Bon engaging audiences in a way that previous singer Dave Evans never had, the band rose to the top of the live circuit and went into the studio to record their first LP, with ex-Easy Beats George Young and Harry Vander producing. Released in early 1975, High Voltage was a shot in the arm to the Australian music scene, and to promote it, the band made their first notorious TV appearance on the primetime show Countdown.
Certainly they were a cat among the pigeons on Countdown, which was very kind of, well, you know, the whole period at that time, you know, mid-70s, it was kind of very glam rock and, you know, quite fey and a lot of poppiness. And AC/DC like stomped into Countdown, and whilst they were kind of, they were sort of a bit glam rock a little bit, you know, you know,
particularly, but to go for Baby Please Don't Go, which everyone knew, and immediately identify with, all right, okay, we've heard that before, we understand that the song, and they play it really damn well. And you got this strange vocalist dressed as a schoolgirl with a guitarist dressed as a schoolboy. What the hell is going?
Example of the anti-establishment kind of stance that you know, AC/DC basically lived for. Could have also been poking fun a bit at what they saw as perhaps the glammier rock bands is all a bit gay. The choice of song, Baby Please Don't Go, well, you know, they've never ever shied away from what inspired them. To this day, they still talk about their love of stuff like Chuck Berry and Little Richard, and covering a driving rocker from the 60s by them was, you know, it's laying down a marker and saying, well, you know, you might be inspired by sort of wearing makeup. We're inspired by this sort of stuff.
The performance paid off, introducing audiences to AC/DC's unique brand of back-to-basics rock and roll and boosting sales of the band's album, High Voltage, making them one of Australia's most successful young acts.
We started off at a time when music was very, you know, very soft and very lightweight, you know, and we started off playing the total opposite of what was, you know, the world was, you know, the media at the time and the world was supposedly into. And, you know, from that we, you know, I think almost straight away it was like we captured, you know, a lot of people, you know, from just word of mouth, you know, people were into what we were doing straight away.
It took off. I mean, you know, radio in Australia at that time was very, very supportive. And, yeah, so in the early days we went from playing to 50 people to being able to play, you know, to 4,000 or 5,000 people at Festival Hall and Horden Pavilion, big concerts. And they became incredible incredibly big. Their first album, for Australia in those days, I think it sold 200,000 or 300,000 copies, which was enormous in Australia alone.
They hit the ground running. I mean, their success was pretty instant in terms of record sales, and they were doing platinum, double platinum, triple platinum. But keep in mind, they were doing it with pretty sort of relentlessly white-hot rock and roll records. This wasn't a band that just grew gradually and picked up their sales and that. This was a band who were platinum from their first outing and have never been anything but.
Capitalising on their quick success, the band returned to the studio to record a follow-up to High Voltage. The sessions produced AC/DC's first bona fide classic, It's a Long Way to the Top if you want to rock and roll.
It's a Long Way to the Top is the first really strong example of what a band like AC/DC can do that sets them to where they are, that other rock bands can't do and therefore don't achieve the same kind of heights. And that is, as well as the hard driving rockers that they can write anthems.
To this day, when It's a Long Way to the Top is put on in a bar, in a club or anything, everyone just goes mental to it because it's a great anthem. And it's not just about the guitars and the vocals, it's got bagpipes, for God's sake, all over it. I mean, what other band do you know that actually would say, let's put bagpipes in a really early track when nobody really knows who we are? But Bond played bagpipes and actually said, well, it's such an uplifting chant-along anthem. It's a real driving force, but it's got, bottom line, hook. It's got a chorus that people remember. They knew even then how to write catchy songs and develop them with a real groove. And that's the important thing about It's a Long Way to the Top. Right back then, they could do that with so much heart, so much passion, so much belief, and make you believe it.
Boosted by the single, AC/DC's second album, TNT, saw them return to the top of the charts. Only 18 months after Bon Scott had joined the band, they were now the biggest homegrown act in Australia. Yet despite their success, they refused to bask in its glory and instead continued with a gruelling touring schedule that saw them win over audiences countrywide.
Their work ethic was second to none. It was fantastic. They would work as often as I could get them gigs.
And with Bon up the front, Angus jumping around like lunatics and the others looking like they'd just stolen something. It was great, fantastic songs, but also I think there was a certain sort of drama with all of those songs that really was their stagecraft. They looked like they'd lived it, and they sounded like they wanted to share it.
One thing you've got to keep in mind too is how much affection AC/DC engendered. And it was a real and true affection, probably because we sensed even then that this was a real commitment to what they were doing. There was something about the veracity, the honesty, and the integrity, really, of AC/DC, the young AC/DC, and they couldn't give a shit attitude to everything but the music they were playing and the fans they were playing it to. That really endeared them to Australia.
Although the band were endearing themselves through their no-nonsense rock and roll approach, the audience for AC/DC shows was not as rough and ready as their music would suggest.
The audience was primarily young girls, so it almost became a case of then, much like the Beatles, they'd go and do a gig and then get pulled off stage, and the girls went hysterical. It was mayhem. Hard for anyone now to appreciate how much it was driven by young girls, and it was one of the reasons we had to get out of Australia, because certainly wasn't where the band was at. You know, they didn't want to be, you know, sort of in that teeny bopper kind of area of the business.
Despite the unexpected pop audience, the band nevertheless became notorious for their offstage antics. Yet where sex and rock and roll were always part of the agenda, AC/DC were more clean living than their reputations suggested.
Whilst most other groups around were sort of really, you know, sort of much heavier in that area, you know, AC/DC weren't. Look, there was a lot of sex. I mean, they weren't, you know, affectionately known as the Seedies for nothing, you know. I mean, there was a lot of that going down. And there was a lot of alcohol-related, you know, kind of substance, you know, happening. As far as drugs, there was, you know, nothing really heavy. I mean, Bon used to get, you know, engage in that side of it a little bit more. But Angus was very anti-drugs. In fact, you know, it's Malcolm to a degree, very anti-drugs.
Malcolm or Angus, apart from a little, you know, mucking around when they were a bit younger, they didn't want to go to parties, get on the red carpet or take drugs or anything like that. And so that's a good thing not to have, you know, if you want to stick around in this game. When Bon was in the band and Angus and Malcolm and the rest of them are personifying sex and drugs, well, Bon had to do it for everybody else, right? Because none of the rest of them were doing it.
In the entire period that, you know, that I was involved with Angus, I never saw him have one drink. You know, he's a teetotaler. I mean, I have heard that there were the odd occasion when he would, but no, he was total teetotal as far as I know. He used to smoke cigarettes heavily, drink tea, and that was Angus.
By early 1976, with TNT riding high in the charts, AC/DC decided the time was right to move on. Now the biggest band in Australia, it was time to conquer new territories. And after 12 years living on the other side of the world, the young brothers prepared to return to their homeland.
Well, the whole idea really about the UK was that because of the size of the place, the concentration of the media, you could actually get something going there very, very fast. If you start to make it in the UK, you start to get somewhat of an international vibe, and then you branch out from there. But you know, it was cool. You know, that was the strategy, to go there and, you know, get it happening in a market that's watched by the rest of the world.
A lot of Australian bands toyed with international success. In other words, you know, popped over for a 3-month stint, or, you know, put their toe in the water. You know, I think for a band to succeed on a global scale, you have to think on a global scale, and you can't just pop over for a couple of promo trips here and there. You've got to do the hard yards, and when a territory's taking off, man, you've got to be there. You've got to play those festivals. You've got to be on those TV shows. You've got to be in people's faces and available.
In April 1976, the band left Australia and relocated to London. Yet the music scene that greeted them when they arrived was very different to those they had dominated in Sydney and Melbourne. Punk rock was about to explode in Britain, but rather than distance themselves from it, the band embraced it.
DC came over to the UK in 1976. Their first gig was in Hammersmith at the Red Cow, and I was privileged to be there to see their first ever gig. And they came over at a time when punk was just starting to really take off. And in America, the Ramones had suddenly come through with very much a 1, 2, 3, 4, straight down the line rock and roll approach. DC fitted everything because their music was so much about the street. It came off the street, it came out of the alleyways, it came out of gangs. So they fitted straight into the environment without even meaning to.
The whole idea about AC/DC being a punk band was primarily generated by their UK record company in an attempt. It's just a feeble marketing ploy, the kind of bollocks that you get from a record company time and time again. However, it's interesting that they did it, because there are areas of what AC/DC did and what they stood for and how they did it that do link them with whatever punk felt it was standing for. They were the man facing down authority, and that's very punk in itself. The whole idea that punk was taking rock and roll back to its primal self, that was something AC/DC had done when they started out. They've always been a rock and roll band who play hard rock, and there is an argument that all punk was heavy rock played badly and some bloke shouting over the top instead of somebody singing over the top. So there are links, cultural, sociological, musical links, and AC/DC, I think being AC/DC, would have just embraced whoever at the time because that's what they were like.
In a matter of months, the band established themselves in the UK with the same determined work ethic that had seen them prosper back in Australia.
One of the reasons why they broke through relatively quickly had something to do with where they came from. Like in Australia, it was not uncommon for them to drive between Sydney and Melbourne to do a couple of gigs, get in the van, sleep overnight, do it. In other words, you went out and you did vast distances and you worked incredibly hard. So they'd be in London, at like their house in London, and their agency would ring them, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something, say, look guys, we got this gig tonight in Oxford, and none of our bands will even touch it. No one would dream of driving that far on this sort of short notice. And I suppose you guys would do it. And Bon would say, well, how far is it? Oh, you'd be there in a couple of hours. And oh, shit, yeah.
This was our, it was like our make or break when we first come here. So we had to make a go of it, pay, we had a lot of debt and stuff. So, we really had to come here and try and break into, the music scene of the world from here. So really here we were discovered from here, weren't we?
Actually, the first time we ever headlined here, Bon decided to get a tube to the gig rather than get a car. So he came along and with all the fans, basically off the train. And when he got here, he couldn't get in. So he was walking up and down the front, and we had some people taking a photo out in front of the Hammersmith booth the first time we headlined in Britain at all. And they took a photo, and walking along the front of the Hammersmith is Bon with all these fans trying to get in.
Bon had become the life and soul of AC/DC, a wayward rogue who charmed the British audience in much the same way as he had back in Australia. And on the band's third album, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, he also showed that he was developing as a unique lyricist.
He was continually out there, lovable, character, beautiful, probably the best rock and roll poet, well, one of the best rock and roll poets of all time. I just think his lyrics just resonate with people. Street poetry, he's just the best.
Bon Scott as a lyricist was remarkable. The Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap album actually sums it up maybe better than almost anything else. There is this feeling that Bon came to represent what it was like to be an Australian more than almost yet.
An anti-establishment national anthem from Australia, because he's from Scotland. But it's the single man against authority. It's an anti-authoritarian kind of thing. That's the whole image that Bon conveys superbly in Jailbreak.
By early 1976, AC/DC had made a significant impact in the UK, and as they wowed British audiences on a nightly basis, the band themselves became more honed.
I could just see them, starting to really, grow and the teenage thing when it didn't exist in England. They started to play to rock audiences, and that was great. So it allowed them to evolve further into that, kind of rock and roll band, that they became. They matured and they could see that, given, the progress continuing, that eventually they were going to go all the way.
Going all the way meant one thing: cracking the US. In July 1977, the band once again left one territory to go and conquer another.
SDC, when they eventually got out there, wouldn't have found the touring, the vast touring that you have to do. And what you have to remember is that even compared with whatever kind of sort of hefty work schedule a band might have to undertake today, back in the 70s when AC/DC were going out with some of the greats, with like Aerosmith and UFO and things like that, The tours were even longer. The methods of transport were more grueling. It was a slog. But they've never been afraid to push themselves. They'd have just tackled it head on. There was no ego there, which is what seems to blight most British bands that go over there. They think they're superstars already and then don't want to put the work in. AC/DC met every challenge head on. Come on, let's do this. We're not going to let them beat us. It goes back to the whole, us against the world attitude that drove them on from day one.
But America would prove a tougher market to crack than Australia or the UK. Returning to England in 1978, the band recorded the seminal Power Rage album. And although it remains one of their most popular LPs, its rough edges were seen as too abrasive for US radio. George Young and Harry Vanda had successfully produced every AC/DC album so far, yet it was now felt that fresh talent was required to take the band to the very top. Enter young producer Mutt Lange.
Power Rage is a very interesting album. It's Keith Richards' favourite AC/DC album, and he's a huge AC/DC fan. It's their last album with Vanda and Young, and I know for a fact that one member of AC/DC, who shall remain Bon Scott, wanted a new producer. He felt that Vanda and Young couldn't take AC/DC as a whole any further. Bon felt that with a new producer, he could open up his environment, he'd be encouraged to do so, and by doing that, the others would come along with him.
The group needed to go to the next level production-wise, and Atlantic Records basically, insisted on a producer change. I was put in a situation where I had to find another producer for them very fast, and I just happened to be living with Mutt Lange, and I virtually put the phone down from Malcolm. I turned around to Mutt and said, "You've got to make this next AC/DC record."
With Mutt Lange on board, the band recorded their landmark Highway to Hell album, their strongest record yet. On its release, it broke into the US charts, and it would later be widely hailed as one of the greatest albums of all time. Yet the title track about the band's grueling life on the road would prove eerily prophetic for Bon Scott.
Highway to Hell took AC/DC to another level in terms of sound, in terms of style, and almost in terms of performance. Somehow, Bon was a man reborn, because you listen to him on that album and he has the room to do things. He sounds stronger than he'd even met himself, has stood the test of time so magnificently. It's almost become the Bon Scott era anthem, and quite rightly so, because it does speak about so many different levels. You can talk about it as that life on the road is the highway to hell. It was supposed to be written about the fact that there was a pub at the bottom of a road in Australia that Bon used to go to quite a lot, and it was dangerously placed because when you crossed the road, traffic would come from a blind spot and people got killed there. So it's got all those sort of connotations. And of course, the other thing about I'm going down all the way because of my lifestyle. Look at the way it is. And of course, that sadly became a comment on Bon himself later on. But I think it's such a tremendous anthem.
Of the dreariness of life on the road, and it's a pity really for Bon in a way, because that dreariness was about to be removed in favour of superstardom, and unfortunately for him, it was snatched away from him, the chance to taste that before he got what was a deserved chance, because he, along with the rest of the band, had been pivotal in getting them to that point.
Now firmly established in America, the band continued touring across the US and Europe to huge audiences. Yet Bon Scott's rock and roll lifestyle was beginning to take its toll.
Bon was just out there, he was just getting shit-faced every night, getting into trouble, making, girls pregnant. You just get phone calls that, to say, it's such and such a hospital, we've got Bon Scott, and give us your number, and, you'd go there and, he would have taken too many pills or, got into a fight, or, he was continually out there. I mean, he used to say that he didn't want to live beyond, I forget what it was, 40 or something, but I don't think anyone really felt that he was in danger of, doing himself in, through what he was doing.
But he was. On February the 19th, 1980, just before he was about to commence work on AC/DC's follow-up to Highway to Hell, Bon Scott passed out during a bout of heavy drinking. Left overnight in a friend's car, in the morning he was discovered lifeless and was pronounced dead on his arrival at King's College Hospital. The official cause was listed by the coroner as death by misadventure.
I was just in an elevator in a building in North Sydney, and someone just came up to me and told me, and it was I was just totally shocked, and just couldn't believe, in total disbelief really. It was just kind of weird hearing it from this person that I barely knew, and just disbelief really.
The band were shell-shocked. Yet after briefly considering quitting, with the blessing of Bond's mother, they decided to press on. After holding several auditions, they chose to recruit Brian Johnson from the British rock band Geordie as their new lead singer. It would be the greatest trial that AC/DC had faced, losing the figure who had given the group so much personality and introducing a new frontman just as they were looking to truly crack America.
I think probably the hardest was when Bon Scott, I think that was died. I think that was probably the hardest thing, because we didn't know whether we would continue as a band, and so that was what I would say would be the hardest thing to do.
Bon was one of the greatest rock and roll frontmen that the world has ever seen. That Brian Johnson managed to come in and he didn't try to replace him. He was his own man. He tried to fit in with what they did, but not copy Bon, and he's still there, rocking out with them today. Is testament to the band, what they're about, to Brian, and to the memory of Bon himself.
I think if they'd been an even bigger band and Bon Scott had died, it would have been harder. The fact that they were only just starting to really crack it and getting a big fan base, it was easier for Brian Johnson to come in. I'm sure there's millions of people who listen to AC/DC around the world now and don't even know or remember Bon Scott.
Tragically, Bon's death added another layer to the whole saga in hindsight. Probably sounds ghoulish to say that, and certainly he's, was an incredible loss to the band, but the way that they bounced back in record time, within weeks they recorded this album that went on to become the biggest of their career.
That album was Back in Black, and it was a phenomenon. Released in July 1980, it not only fully broke the band in America, but broke sales records worldwide. The second best-selling album of all time, with to date more than 49 million copies sold, it was dedicated to Bon Scott. But it was also the successful introduction of Brian Johnson, whose voice made the band's appeal even greater.
Back in Black is a remarkable album. It's full of wonderful songs. It does deserve to be as huge as it was, and they found in Brian Johnson the perfect non-replacement. He was the new vocalist. He wasn't the new Bon Scott. And I know they actually auditioned 2 or 3 people who are very close in personality and style to Bon, and decided they're too close. We don't want someone just to come in and replace him. We want someone very different. And you listen to the record, and it is a different record. It's still got the AC/DC groove, but Brian Johnson's vocals are very different. And some of the songs, like Hell's Bells, somehow you can't imagine that being part of the...
A rock singer, the way they thought a rock singer should be in a way. Brian, for an international audience, possibly just gelled just that little bit sort of, more effectively than Bon might.
DC would have played to Bon Scott would have been fitting, because sort of that sort of band, and they would have made sure it was fitting. I think one of the sad things at the time was that DC got Brian Johnson into the band so quickly, people thought they didn't care. I think that's far from the truth, and I think you can tell on Back in Black itself how much the song meant to them as much as it did to the audience as being a tribute to Bon. It is a fitting tribute, but I feel that any song they would have written about Bon would have been a fitting tribute. They would have made sure record, not only in terms of its sales, not only in terms of the great songs, but in terms of the way it sounds. It still sounds enormous. And it was Mutt Lange, for me, getting to grips with the band on the second time he'd worked with them. First time, okay, feeling my way a little bit, so let's see how things go. Second was, right, let's go out and make the great rock album, the ultimate rock album. And he did it with them. absolutely did it with them, because it does sound like it could have been a Led Zeppelin record. It could have been a Black Sabbath record at their pomp and their prime. It could have been any of those great bands making an ultimate record. And he set out to do that with them and did it.
Having now established themselves as one of the biggest rock acts in history, AC/DC looked to build on the success of Back in Black. Yet despite the strong follow-up For Those About to Rock, the band struggled to regain form in the 1980s. Across the decade, they continued to draw huge audiences to their live shows, but from 1983's Flick of the Switch, they began to be criticised for being musically unadventurous, something that the band themselves acknowledged.
There's this great story. There's a lovely anecdote. I believe it's true, and I've used it many a time. And this is sort of about mid-career. And there's an interview being done by, I think it was a young woman, as I recall, and she was from college newspaper or college radio or something like that. And she's interviewing Angus, and she gets all sort of, she thinks she's got him here. And she says, "So what do you say, Angus, or Mr. Young probably, about those people who say that you've made 13 albums and they've all sounded the same?" He drew his little shoulders back and he puffed out his wee chest and he said, "It's a dirty, rotten lie. We've made 14 albums and they all sound the same."
Yet the Young brothers were struggling to come up with the kind of strong songs that had made their name. And throughout the decade, sales of AC/DC albums dropped significantly.
People always look for the reasons of a band's decline, but I think there's always a period, a purple patch, where bands write great songs. They're going through this momentum which drives them forward, the urge to succeed, the urge to win people over, and then maybe it dries up a little bit. So AC/DC are no different to anybody else. You look at a band like the Rolling Stones, how many times have they made an album with one or two good songs and a lot of filler? It's happened to everybody. DC were just no different to everyone else. People have tried to put the finger on the fact that they didn't work with Mutt Lange after For Those About to Rock. Maybe that's the reason, maybe it isn't. I just think their time for writing that collection of great songs had run out for the moment, although they did get it back, thankfully.
Having set themselves up as going to be massive with Back in Black, and then to a certain extent with For Those About to Rock, they did take a couple of hits. Commercially, they weren't as big as they had been, but there was no let-up in the quality of the live shows. And to be honest, hindsight to these ears suggests that Flick of the Switch is a very good record, just doesn't happen to sound very commercial. Fly on the Wall, I'm no fan. And Blow Up Your Video, there was signs that they were getting things back on track. Of course, at the same time, all this coincided with Malcolm's alcohol problems. Simon Wright left the band. They had to get another drummer in. It was probably not the best decade. They might have started it with an album which went on to become the second biggest selling album of all time. But the 80s, they were probably glad when the 80s were over, I would have thought.
In 1990, the band's fortunes changed. With the release of the album The Razor's Edge, they returned to the global popularity of their glory years. With its opening anthem Thunderstruck providing them with an international hit single, the band had stuck to their classic rock roots but reshaped their sound for a modern audience.
The Razor's Edge was a very interesting album, and the choice of producers very interesting as well. They go for Bruce Fairbairn, a man who's known for Bon Jovi and Aerosmith. And in terms of production, it's certainly the slickest record that they've ever made. And I think perhaps a good choice by them, because I think they'd had looked back at the 80s and thought, we can't go through that again.
AC/DC were at a stage in their career by the beginning of the 90s, just around the time when grunge was happening, where they needed an infusion of something to prove to themselves more than anything else that they had a fan base that was going to grow, that they were going to appeal to the kids coming through as much as they were to the people who were there in the 1970s. And therefore the Razor's Edge, in particular Thunderstruck, was massively important to them. Thunderstruck, he understands commerciality, or understood commerciality, sadly no longer with us, but he'd worked with bands like Bon Jovi and understood what it took to get a song from being a really good rock song into a really good mass market song. And he did that with Thunderstruck. It's full of those motifs and moments. It's got some great Angus guitar. It's got some great sing-along moments. And at times, Brian Johnson sounds like Tina Turner from the Ike and Tina Turner days. It's got that sort of real vibe about it. It's got a groove that's AC/DC.
The fact is that it was a huge success, the album, another massive success, and it basically built on what they'd done with Blow Up Your Video. They headlined Donington and sort of set themselves up for the 90s sort of very nicely. Obviously, their work rate had slowed down considerably by this point. Certainly, if you look at what happened in the first 10 years of their existence to sort of that point. But yeah, they got themselves back into a very good position. And it was all really by taking a gamble. By gambling on Bruce Fairbairn, on gambling on changing their sound somewhat.
With only 2 new releases in the next 10 years, 1995's Ball Breaker and 2000's Stiff Upper Lip, AC/DC may not have been as prolific as they had been, but their sellout world tours still allowed fans to see one of the greatest shows on earth. And attitudes towards them changed over time. Where once they were dismissed as rock dinosaurs, they were now being hailed as living legends with a unique sound all of their own.
There was a point, definitely, when AC/DC got a lot of criticism from people because they've repeated the same thing over and over again. They only know how to write one song. There's one way of doing things. You always know an AC/DC song because of the sound, and really it's formulaic and boring and dull, isn't it? And then suddenly people realise it's not formula, it's groove. It's about rock and roll. And to be honest, no one does what they do better. And suddenly people not just accepted but embraced it. They wanted AC/DC to be that band. They didn't want AC/DC to go into reggae, electronica, dance music, to try different things the way the Stones have done, for instance. They wanted DC to be who they are. And they became not establishment, but a safe band that people felt comforted they're still there and they're still making albums which have that AC/DC sound because no one wants anything different.
I always like things that, you can tap your foot to, and that's, you've got to have that. You've got to have that ingredient. You've got to have, tracks, I think, that, instantly grab you, and it's got to sound like AC/DC, and, for the people who know you as AC/DC, you want them to be able to say, oh, that's AC/DC and no one else.
There is an AC/DC sound. It existed with The Who. It exists with the Rolling Stones. That sort of ability to just plug in and become who you are, to the point where nobody could even dream of imitating or copying or anything else. That's the case with AC/DC, and that comes with performing for we're looking at almost 40 years now.
Picking up new generations of fans as the world moved into a new century, the band remained quiet for the best part of a decade. And then, in 2008, a new album finally emerged, Black Ice. Going to #1 in over 29 countries, it once again brought AC/DC back to the very height of their popularity.
They were in a position now where they could take quite a lot of time. I mean, sort of 5 years between Razor's Edge to Ball Breaker. 5 years then between Ball Breaker and Stiff Upper Lip. Partly because their tours were so long, partly because they were in a position that, they could do that. And at their ages, they can't keep that work rate up. The 8 or 9 years between Stiff Upper Lip and Black Ice led most people to believe they were never going to see another AC/DC album again. And there were all sorts of rumours and stuff like that. Of course, when they did get that AC/DC album, wow. It's almost as if, having weathered the storm of the 80s, it seems that, they might have taken 2 decades to do it, but they gradually were working their way back to the very pinnacle that they had once achieved with Back in Black, with Black Ice.
Now in their 5th decade as a band, AC/DC move incessantly onwards, unfazed by criticism, unaffected by fashion. The determination of the band, and Angus and Malcolm Young in particular, to keep AC/DC true to its original philosophy of hard-hitting rock and roll has meant that they are now unrivaled musical legends.
There is something that drives them on. It's the belief in the music that inspired them. It's the belief in themselves, no matter how many times people might tell them that they're worthless, they mean nothing, they're wrong. They're like, we will do what we do the way we do it. And at the end of the day, you have to admire that attitude. even more so when they proved themselves right time and time again.
Well, we've outlived quite a few fashion shows. Yeah. We're still, you know, we're still playing what we always did best, which was good old hard rock and roll. Yeah. You know? And that's what they're all going to hear tonight.
With almost 40 years worth of classic tracks to draw from, AC/DC's live show has grown into an unparalleled spectacle. From their roots on the Australian pub circuit to their current stadium and arena tours, the band's determination to bring their fans a world-class show has never wavered.
I always think a great band is somebody who can walk into a room, pick up an audience and take them with them. And I think AC/DC have always done that.
You can bet your bottom dollar that it's going to be a red-hot show. And when I see an AC/DC concert, I have this huge smile on my face. It is such a joyous experience. From Angus dropping his DACs to the big inflatables to the pyros, I mean, they really put on a great show. It's a guaranteed good night out.
It's a case of you can't go on and rest on your laurels. You've got to get on there and show them yet again you're better than what you were 4 years ago.
I think with AC/DC, every gig that they do, even if it's 4 months into the tour, it makes the kids feel like it's the first one we've done.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we're just as keen and eager as them.
I think AC/DC have transcended generations in the same way as the Stones have, because they've continued playing live. People have gone and people have come, but the basis of the band is still there.
AC/DC are eternal because, and this was evident on the Black Ice tour, where I swear a third to a half of the audience seemed to be under 10. And they're sitting in there with the little Angus, the devil's horn caps on and all that. And you realise that these kids are there because their big brother or their father has turned them onto AC/DC, and there's nothing surer than the fact that they will do the same. Now, I don't know how long these wiry little guys can stay on their feet and keep doing it, but I've got to tell you, for as long as they do keep doing it, they're going to have an audience.
Through their continual belief that they should remain true to themselves, AC/DC have survived lineup changes, shifts in culture, and the death of an iconic frontman. It may have been a long way to the top, but to remain there for so many years proves that AC/DC are the greatest rock band the world has ever seen.
In sticking to their guns, AC/DC occupy a special place in rock fans' hearts. They never chased any trends. Trends come and go. They weren't interested in that. Everything about them is true to themselves and their fans and their music. It's honest, hard-working rock and roll music from a bunch of honest, hard-working, working-class rock and rollers.
I've never sensed in all the years, I think, that I've known them, the slightest bit of pretension about them. The trappings of their extraordinary fame doesn't appear to have had much impact upon them whatsoever. They do what they do, and you get the feeling that all will be right with the world as long as they keep on doing what they do.
Angus, would you like to say anything else for your son?
Just thanks to everyone, and keep on rocking and rolling. Thank you very much. Thanks.